Welcome back to another episode of Transitions from War. I'm your host, Mike Ergo, a Marine Corps veteran. I've returned from Iraq and faced the challenges of PTSD, addiction, and grief to create a new life that is balanced and healthy in mind, body, and spirit. I'm joined by fellow Marine Rich Strayling, and together we talk about our journey to mental and physical health through endurance sports. Each episode will share some of our journey or interview inspired veterans and subject matter experts to help us find that purpose and connection we all crave. You can follow the show on Instagram at Transitions from War. Join our TFW page on Facebook, Twitter, and transitionsfrommore.com. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, feel free to email me at mike@transitionsfrommore.com. And if you enjoy the show, consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your audio. As always, thanks for listening, everyone, and let's get to the show. I think we're on. So Errol, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here.
Mike, I appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Yeah. So in honor of today, I made sure I got my cold shower in. I got some meditation in because I know the Wim Hof method is a big part of your life these days. And where do we start? What's a good jumping off point for you?
I think that we can start with the Wim Hof method and just, as it relates to the challenges, Transitions for War addresses, kind of that mental and emotional health, and what are kind of the physiological things that the Wim Hof method does, at least that I think will really help, some people who are trying to, get past some really hard stuff.
Yeah. So I'm familiar, with the Wim Hof method, and that involves breathing and involves being in really cold circumstances. Yeah. But how does that tie in with leadership, and how does that tie in with, a healthy lifestyle?
Yeah. So I use my company Leader 193, right, is leadership consulting. And I use the Wim Hof method as kind of a tool to practice my leadership process, right? I developed my process from my experiences in the SEAL teams, in the private sector, in the FBI, and now doing this, working with individuals and corporations pretty much across the world. And, they were initially separate. I found the Wim Hof method separate from my business. And then what I realized, I was like, wow, this has really great practical application. So for example, the first element of my leadership process is around emotional awareness and recognition. And it kind of throws people for a loop sometimes, right? Because I think they expect me to come in fire and brimstone, but I start talking about emotions. And so how do you practice emotional awareness? That's a skill just like anything else, right? It's a skill just like marksmanship. You have to do it all the time. But if it's not something you've done, how do you find time during the day? What do you even do? And so what I'll tell the people I work with is, here's why we're going to get into an ice bath today. Here's why I want you to do that for 5 straight days. And cold shower, ice bath, whatever it is, something cold. And it has to be with the intention. So here's one thing I can promise you. Before you step into an ice bath or before you step into a cold shower, you're going to have an emotion. All right, that's just a fact. You're going to have one.
Yeah.
If your intention is to be aware of that emotion, then now we're practicing. So you can't hide from the cold, right? We can say during the course of the day, well, I'll just try to figure out what my emotions are during the day. Maybe you're being honest with yourself, maybe you're not. Maybe you're being intentional, maybe you're not. There's a lot of leeway just during the day, whether you're really going to be doing it to the best of your ability. But you can't hide from the cold. So you will have the emotion, right? And you will have a feeling. So you just can't pretend that you're not in the cold and you're thinking about something else. So that's the beauty of the cold as an intellectual tool to practice, for example, that aspect of my process. Once you get in, you will have emotions. I want to get out of here. This is stupid. How much longer can I get in? Once you get out, you'll have emotions. So if your intention going into the ice or the cold is let me focus on my emotions. Now you are practicing that as a skill, and you'll get better at it during the course of the day. Why is that important? Well, because as we know, emotions drive our actions. And if we are not aware of the very things that drives what we do, our emotions, then we're just acting randomly. We're just acting and hoping that the result turns out okay.
Right. And a lot of times we're just reacting. We don't have any agency in it. We're just reacting. We're at the whim of whatever emotional state we bring into the room.
Our environment. That's exactly right. So exactly right. So we get into a room, we see that person, and we are ready to react. And we're letting that environment, whether it be a person, the traffic, the TV, whatever it is, control how we react. Okay. And that's backwards, right? And that's why we get caught in these awful cycles, right? Because, a little bit of the science, right? My book is The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership. Okay, the science tells us that we have between 60 and 70,000 thoughts per day. And the science further tells us that 80 to 90% of those are the same as the day before. One more step, for the majority of the people, 70% of those emotions are related to stress. So if you think about it, the scientific research is telling us that we're thinking the same thing that we were thinking the day before, and it's usually something related to stress. So ipso facto, we're going to be thinking that tomorrow, and we could be predicting how we're going to be thinking it in a couple of days or a month, right? So if we don't have that awareness of that emotion and those thoughts, we're not going to make any changes. So that's why we use the cold as that real strong intellectual tool to teach us, right, to be in control of our emotions in a chaotic environment, right? The cold is a metaphor for those stressful emotions in our environment, right? You get in, you are either going to succumb to what the cold does to you, or you are going to realize that you have a strong enough mind, body, and spirit that everything inside of you, your breath and your mind, can allow you to remain calm and focused despite that crazy environment.
Yeah.
So that's why I use it for myself first and foremost, and that's kind of how I've used it as a tool for the people who I work with.
There's something I love about the cold water. I like to swim in the San Francisco Bay, which is in the 50s a lot of the time of the year. A lot of time in the wetsuit, but I've done skins too. And there's something I remember about the first time I jumped in the bay to swim. And I mean, my first few thoughts were fuck.
That's right.
And it's like, this is cold, and thoughts of maybe I should get out, trying to like Rolodex of excuses going through my head of like what I can say to get out of this. And then eventually I was able to find my breath and able to just be in there and say, okay, I can be here, after that initial panic and turbidity happened, and realize that, like you said, my mind is strong enough to be here, and being able to handle those fear-based emotions in order to be there and realize I'm gonna be okay. This is just fine.
The cold is just a thing. We assign the emotion to it, right? And that's exactly, you went through the exact process that I walk people through, right? Oh shit, oh this or that. I got to get out of here. And then, funny thing happens though when you're in it. Like, God, I'm already here. I heard somebody say, take a deep breath one time. Well, yes. Okay. Now, why does that matter? Because this is the beauty of the science. Because physiologically, right, once we get in, we are inducing a panic attack, right, voluntarily. So we can get into how we're manipulating our nervous system, how we're relieving stress, like literally from our body, the inflammation created by stress by getting into the cold. So we do that. We get into the cold, panic attack. When we take a deep breath, right? And I've listened to a bunch of your stuff, so I know all this science. We activate the vagus nerve, right? Mm-hmm. The vagus nerve literally serves as we exhale to calm us down. Okay, now we are calmed down through our breath and our mind because we've made that decision, right? And that's important.
Yeah.
Okay. And now all of a sudden we are in the cold, we're in that chaos, and we are now activating our parasympathetic, our rest and digest. We are literally voluntarily resetting our nervous system. Okay. And that's Wim Hof method. Wim Hof He doesn't do anything without a team of scientists running around with him now. And that is now science. That is now a fact. When he told them, I can influence my immune system and my autonomic nervous system, the scientist said, hey, stupid, it's an autonomic system. It happens automatically. You can't influence it. And then the series of tests they did with them, they said, oh my gosh, he's doing it. And then they did, control group tests and things like that. So that's why the cold, right? For all things, those of us who are suffering from some past trauma or are just trying to better ourselves from the day to day, right? We don't have that thing from our past weighing us down. It's the only way to go.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea of you induce that panic, that fight or flight, and build the resilience through learning, oh, I can handle this. And so you're actually in control of these panic attacks. You're in control of this happening because you're putting yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
So how does that translate into leadership, and how does that translate into how veterans getting out of the military can take that into their job and their life?
Well, when we talk about transitioning, right, we talk about transition from war, just transition from the military. And these days it's one and the same, right? If you've been in the service for the last 20 years, you've likely seen something. And so here's what's going to happen when you leave the service. You're going to have an emotion. And when you go into that new place, right, where you are no longer with your band of brothers and sisters, you're just in corporate, whatever it is, right? Corporate, small business, corporate, big business. There is a void. Okay. And there's a void that you're going to have to recognize, because it's going to be an emotion. It's going to be, am I worthy? I'm insecure. Or maybe even worse, I feel superior to these people. Don't they know what I did in the military? Right. All of that ego that sometimes we bring with us when we leave the military, that nobody else is really worthy of me and my experience. So if we're not recognizing those emotions, we are going to act in a way that's not in our best interest. It's not in a way the best interest of our new team. And by the way, most importantly, we're going to be acting in a way that's not in the best interest of our personal life, our family, because that's going to it's going to translate. Because if we're not showing the ability to transition from those combat scenarios, from those military scenarios into the private sector, we're also, don't think for 1 second that you're transitioning to your family life, your new family life, and that new reality. Okay. Because you're not. You are transitioning in all places the same way, whether you want to believe it or not. The people who say, no, I'm a different person at work than I am at home. No, you're not. You're not. You're probably pretty much the same. So that's the biggest thing, how we use that in leadership, even outside of transitioning, just moving into a leadership role. Any leadership is filled with emotional stressors. And if we are not aware of them, then we are just going to act, and we're going to act randomly. We're not going to act consciously.
That's true. And I know a big part of this is, like you said, the next step, understanding the culture that you're in now. And I remember getting out, and I always remember this experience. So I'm working for a law firm as a clerk, and basically I'm the coffee bitch, and I'm making copies for people, delivering files here and there. And so I remember finishing this one project, and I was proud of myself. I got all the copies collated and all hole punched and all that shit. Yeah, and I was doing this. And I remember delivering it to a secretary, and they got upset. And they were really upset about this, because I had committed the ultimate sin, as I think I put the staples like diagonal instead of vertical.
Okay.
And that was one of my first lessons of trying to understand this new culture. Is like, okay, my threshold for, when to get really upset versus in this company, or like understanding what was important and what wasn't, was vastly different. And it wasn't up to them to understand that, we shouldn't be upset about this. It was up to me to adapt to this new culture. Not to say I needed to get upset, but just realize like what was important where I was in my new environment.
Yeah. And, that's a great example, because it's a real example. For some reason, that really exists, right? And if somebody's listening to this and they're like, he's exaggerating. No, you're not. I can see that happening, right? The staple is not correct. It needs to be this way. And if we come out of that with a, don't you know what I did? I've been to war and you're telling me blah, 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 blah. Trust me when I tell you, they don't care. What they care about is the staple. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And what I try to, get across to, and I'm starting to be able to have these conversations more with transitioning vets, which I'm really appreciative of, and being on shows like yours, is we have to understand that when we're in the service, and if we've seen combat, like most of us have who are in these situations, the outside world is thankful and they'll say, thank you for their service. And they mean it. Yeah. But that's about it. That's about the extent of how they want to address it. So, if we think that just because we have this experience, we're going to turn people towards us, we're not. Because ultimately what they'll say is, wow, I didn't realize war heroes could be such dickheads.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But it's not to say we can't be proud of that. We can bring the things that made us survive and thrive in combat and those things, those personality traits to bear. One of them is the humility of understanding there's people out there that understand more than I do. Just like, so when I was in the SEAL teams, if you didn't humble yourself to those Vietnam vets who are still in, when I got in back in the 90s, they were on their way out, but none of us had seen any combat at that point. Not many people had in the 90s. The Vietnam vets did. And yeah, sometimes it was a little like, okay, I got it. You've been there and done that, but I have an idea too. But you still needed to show them deference because they knew. And if you didn't, right, you wouldn't do very well. Well, that's a personality trait that you could bring to the private sector in that transition. When I left the SEAL teams, I got medically discharged. I got injured. And I went and sold copiers. Okay. And I went and sold copiers.
Yeah,
You want to talk about
it's a total life change right there.
Right. Like staples being in the right spot. That's why I get it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and collating and all that stuff, that's all important stuff. But my point is, somebody in the company just commented to me early on. They're like, Errol, it's really interesting watching you because you really are deferring to everybody else in this company. And you did all these things, whatever, the praise they showered on me. And they're like, how do you do that? Basically saying, how could you be a SEAL and then come to this little copier company and then sit with your mouth shut, listen and learn and kind of be the coffee bitch and all that stuff?
Yeah.
And my answer was simple. So because that guy right there, he knows 100 times more than I do about selling copiers. So my experience doesn't bring anything to bear in this other than I know how to humble myself to somebody who knows something I need to learn. Right. So, again, it's the spirit we bring, what makes us great warriors to, that new environment, not necessarily the fact that we were great warriors. Because again, I just, as much as we hate to say, people don't care.
Yeah. They
don't.
Exactly. They look at it's so interesting. Like when we're in, we can see, we can identify people, especially if they're wearing, a service uniform, by the Lebo stack they have, all the ribbons they have, by their rank. So you kind of get like in a couple seconds, oh, this guy has been a lot of places. Or
right. Your whole world is right there on your chest, right?
Exactly. You get out and they're like, oh, I like that one. That's pretty colors, They don't know anything about that. It doesn't mean anything. Nor should it to them.
No, it shouldn't, and it's a hard reality because, and this was even more so I found when I left the FBI, just in those communities, if you're in them and you've never been anywhere else, you think the world is doing nothing but thinking about you and what you do. And when I left the FBI, it was the same thing. Like, oh, cool. You were in the FBI. Oh, cool. You investigated counterterrorism. Awesome. So what do you all want to order? It just, so you have to realize
moving on, right?
Moving on. Great. And what's the ironic part is they'll want to talk about it if you show the proper humility towards that experience, right? If you just bring to bear the things that made you great, those personality traits, they're going to want to hear more about it. But if you're trying to convince them I'm this way because I did all these cool things, it's
just like, all right, let's talk about something else. This
right.
guy's full of himself. Yeah.
Right.
So where is that sweet spot between where getting out of the military or coming back from war, we can bring what we learned, those assets, and avoid some of the hang-ups that we're talking about of being that self-important person who tries to dominate a conversation?
Yeah. So look, and this is not a cheap plug for my book, but it is my leadership process, and it is what I base everything on. So when I say the next element to my leadership process is cultural awareness and recognition, right? Because if emotions drive our actions, our culture is made up of the things we do, not the labels we put on, right? We could say, oh, we've got a culture of excellence. Well, my next question to you is going to be great. What are the three things you do to achieve excellence?
Yeah. How do you define excellence?
Yeah.
Right?
What do you do? We prioritize and execute properly. We don't gossip or badmouth in our work environment. We make sure we plan before we do anything, right? Those are very specific things you do that if you do those things, they create excellence. Okay. And so if you can't tell me a couple of things, 2-3 things that you or your company do to create excellence, I'm like, hey, look, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you don't have a culture of excellence. You just put a meaningless label out there. All right. So those first two elements are around awareness, right? I'm very big on awareness before we start putting real meat on the leadership bone, if you will. Because if we're not aware of how we're feeling and what we're doing, we can't make the targeted adjustments for us personally or for our team personally. So what do we do? And we have to do it without judgment and for better or for worse. Okay. So now I am aware of my emotions. I am feeling full of myself. Okay. But maybe I deserve that, right? Whatever mind game you're playing with yourself. And now you go out and you're aware of what's happening. You're at the lunch table with your new colleagues, and all you're doing is talking about your war experience, right? You're just
so there I was.
There I was, right? The whole thing. Now, if you are being aware of your culture, you're saying to yourself, okay, this is what I'm doing. I initiated a conversation about my past, okay, without even regard whether I think they care about it or not. And now, because I have this awareness within myself, I'm going to have it just naturally flows outward. And I'm looking like these people don't care. Their eyes are glazing over. Okay, that is what I do. That is now my culture. My culture is I talk about myself and I bore people. Okay, that
cool legacy.
Cool legacy, man. So that's where you find the balance. Okay, now you may decide I don't care. People need to hear what I have to say, and I'm awesome. Well, I can't help you then, right? Because if you're not willing to take a look at that reality in in that awareness phase, then we can't go to the next phase and say, okay, I just saw what it is. Now, how do I want it to be? What are the behaviors that I want to exhibit? Okay, and now those are going to be very targeted and specific based on what you've observed, based on your emotions. So you might say, you know what? I need to talk. I need to listen more than I talk, right? That's a behavior. That's a good behavior. If you did that behavior, would you be better at most things that you did, right? It has nothing to do with your widget, right? It has nothing to do with you being a law clerk, right? That's a behavior, though. If you said, I just listen more than I talk, will that make you better at being a law clerk? Yes. Will that make you better being a copier salesman? Yes. Will that make you a better parent? Yes. Right? It goes on and on. So it's a behavior.
Right.
And so that's where we start to transition. That's where we find that line between I have to see what it is, and then I have to start making some decisions about what I want it to be. And only a couple of behaviors, right? 1 or 2 good behaviors have massive ripple effects on everything around you.
Yeah, it's interesting to notice like some of those keystone behaviors, the things you actually do. And what I like about that, like defining excellence, is, I mean, we see it thrown up there a lot, those motivational posters, excellence, or here's the things we believe in. But unless you actually define the behaviors, it's just ambiguity. It's just words up there, and people are trying to guess what it means and eventually give up and just go back to their default behaviors. And then you're not really a leader.
No, you're not. And so when we talk about leadership and accountability, accountability is another one of those words that's thrown out there. Accountability is nothing more by definition than accounting for your actions, answering for what you did, right? So I might say, Mike, why did you just do that? I've just held you accountable. That's it by definition, because you're going to give me an answer.
Yeah,
you are now going to, right. And it might be a good answer. It might be a bad answer, but it's an answer. Okay. People mistake accountability and consequence. All right. So I ask you a question. Why did you do that? Blah, blah, blah. You give me bad answers. Now you've given me 15 bad answers over the course of 3 weeks. Now it's time for consequence, right? So those are the difference. So when we talk about those behaviors, you can't hold someone accountable if they don't know what they're supposed to be accountable to. What are they supposed to be accountable to? Well, if you're the leader, you are in charge of that behavioral environment. Okay, so you need to define what's important to you as a leader from a behavioral standpoint. Outside of the widget, if you didn't change the way you made, marketed, or sold your widget, but behaved in these ways, would you get better? Okay, again, sometimes it's when I took over a sales team, my first leadership position in the private sector after I got out of the teams, and I knew what their problems were, right? They were always late. They gossiped and badmouthed, and they spent half their time bullshitting when they should have been working. Okay. They weren't always honest, right? They weren't always honest about where they were, what they were doing. They weren't always honest about their projections, sales projections, right? So when I came in, I said, okay, hi, I'm Errol. Everybody knew who I was. And I said, here are the 4 behaviors that I will hold you accountable to. We'll be on time. There'll be no gossip and bad mouthing. We will not lie or be deceitful. And we will be working when we're supposed to be working. Now, I had context to all of those, right? I explained why those were important, and people hated it. They hated it, right? It was like, oh, we're not your military people. You're Hitler, the whole thing, right? Anytime somebody throws the Hitler moniker on you, you got it. All right. And all I said to him was, look, you tell me why these things won't help us. Make an argument. It doesn't even have to be a good argument. I'll take them off the list. Okay. But tell me how we're better if we're late. And they took it, right? They weren't even thinking about, they were thinking about the obvious. Oh, so if we're a couple minutes late, blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah, it's inefficient, but that's not even the reason. If I'm here on time and they're here on time, but you 3 walk in late, well, my first thought is you don't have any respect for my time. And it begs the question, what else don't you respect about me? Okay. And what else will you ignore? So we had to get into these conversations around behaviors. After they realized I wasn't a psychopath, that they weren't doing those things. And perhaps if we just did these simple behaviors, we would be a better sales team. They would be better salespeople. They got on board. And to your point, though, I didn't label it, right? Here's our culture. I just said, these are the behaviors. And we went over those behaviors. I held a weekly meeting. I had them written down. We passed them out. We read them out loud once a week for the first 3 months I was there. They got crazy. They're like, Errol, we got it. I said, no, I know you do. We're doing much better. But I just want to make sure that you know how important these things are to me. These are the things that I will never, ever stop talking about until they become part of what we do without even thinking about it. So again, what was the label? I don't know. But that sales team, they turned around on those basic behaviors. They were always on time, right? They were honest with their projections. Gossip and bad-mouthing ended, right? They were salespeople. If they had something to do, I just said, look, if you can only work 3 hours a day, just work 3 hours today, then go home, right? But just when you're here, work. They did that. They turned their whole thing around. I think they were up 200% from last year's number, in the first 4 months, right? But it was just because of what are our behaviors? And to your point, are we holding you accountable to them? Are they clear? And are we talking about them? And are we making sure, right, that's what we're doing?
There's so much parallel right there to sport and consistency and in terms of training. I mean, a lot of the athletes that I look up to, and I in the triathlon world, all of them talk about the consistency of their training, the consistency of what they do, how they define, like you say, like excellence, the behaviors they do, repeated day after day after day, not necessarily making humongous gains in one day, but the incremental improvement.
That's right. And they'll be able to tell you what they do, right? I wake up at this hour every day because I know that waking up at the same time every day is good for my biorhythms and blah, 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 right? Whatever it is. So that automatically helps me. I meditate for 20 minutes a day because I know that meditation sets my intention, blah, 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 blah. They are going to be able to rattle off 5 to 10 things that they do that makes them excellent, right? They don't just say, well, I'm excellent. They say, well, here's what I do. Right. And they're based around behaviors that make them a better triathlete, football player, whatever, curler, whatever it is.
Yeah. So I really like this idea of the process behind it, the process. And like you say, it's an art to know how to negotiate all this, and then backed by science. As we're bringing this, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and the art behind it is just that. So we've talked about emotions, we've talked about culture, what you do, we've talked about guidelines for behavior. The next thing I bring in is a planning process because people don't know how to plan. And it's just something I brought in from the SEAL teams and modified it a little bit. But my behaviors that I identify for myself based on my emotions and what I do are going to be different than yours. Okay. Because there's going to be certain things that I need to do, certain behaviors that I need to do to get better that you may not need to do. But let's all agree that we need to establish behavioral guidelines, right? That's kind of the art. And then practicing that art is through the cold exposure. How do you use cold exposure for behavioral guidelines? Well, if you've decided on some behaviors that you need to work on, trust me, if you walk into an ice bath or a cold shower with those behaviors in mind, you're going to be able to practice those behaviors. Patience, intention, courageous decisions. No matter what it is, you will be able to apply that new behavior to effectively making it through the ice bath. I promise you. Yeah. And then the science behind all these things, I just stumbled on that stuff because I was interested. And I'm like, wait a second, this is awesome because my leadership process mirrors the process the brain goes through to make behavioral change, which I think is important for people suffering from that PTSD and some of those traumas from whatever they've experienced in the past. There is a way to rewire that stuff. Not easy, but it exists.
But it exists, yeah. And I really found that that's why I've never shut up about triathlon and sport, because just how much it's changed my brain and changed my physiology. Because you put yourself in a stressful situation and you're putting yourself in there, and you teach your body that, okay, we're having this fight or flight reaction. Here's what we do to put it back into rest and digest. Problem solved. And your body eventually learns. Some of us have stubborn bodies. It takes a little longer to learn. We got thicker skulls, but you know what? It works. And that's what I love about that cold exposure. You get in there, your body freaks out, and then you realize you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, and is it okay if I kind of walk through the science of what you just said? Because that's it, right? So there's something's happening in your life, and you decide you need to do triathlons, right? That I have to do something, okay? Because you recognized there was an emotion that was happening that was not good for you, right? That's the first step, okay? So now the fact that you recognize, I'm feeling this way. I am feeling stressed about something that happened in my past. I'm feeling this certain way, and I want to feel differently. In science, they just call it metacognition, right? You have a feeling about your feeling. You are awareness. You have an awareness about your awareness. Okay. The second you have that awareness, the research tells us you're already rewiring your brain. Just the fact that you've recognized it. Okay. Then you said, okay, now I'm going to do something else. I have to behave. I have to have a different culture, right? Because right now what I'm doing is this emotion of stress is allowing me to sit on the couch all day, eat chicken wings, and watch gladiator for the 1,000th time, right? That's your culture.
Yeah.
Right. So you're saying, no, I need to have a more positive attitude. So I want one of worthiness. And I want my culture to be, I want to be active, right? You're already now thinking. Research tells us you're rewiring your brain. Okay. Then you decide, how do I want to go about these things? I want to go about them joyfully. I'm so tired of being stressed out and miserable. It's not going to happen automatically, but you're telling your brain something new, and your brain is starting to rewire. Now, when does it really start to pay attention? When you make that plan and you say, triathlon is what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy a bike. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to watch a video. I'm going to start by walking. You're making a plan. Now your brain is paying attention. And now the rewiring process begins, right? That's what happens. Now, the final part of my process is just called the resistance, right? Everybody uses that term. But what does that mean? You're going to fall. You're going to falter. You're going to go back to that old thought, right? Even some of those old behaviors. Why? Because your brain is neurochemically addicted to those past emotions, right? We already went through it. 80 to 90,000 thoughts per day. 60 to 70% is the same the day before, whatever my numbers are, right? And 70% of those to the emotions of stress. Your body and your brain aren't just going to let you change. They've got a neurochemical addiction to that emotion because you've just lived it over and over and over again. So the resistance, and so now that we know the science behind that change, when we fall off a little bit, we can have a little grace and compassion with ourselves and say, look, okay, I just fell off. I know why. I'm literally trying to rewire my brain. And that's hard. There's going to be stumbles. It's okay. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, I suck, I'm lazy, I don't care, right? No, that's not what it is. So I just, obviously you can see my passion for this.
Yes.
Are you, I hope you're seeing, the people coming back with those war wounds, right? Those emotional wounds, whatever the terminologies we use. I'm not a clinician, but we know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. I'm coming back and I'm hurting and I can't seem to get out of that. You can't get out of it because you're continuously thinking about it and you're having that emotion. And I don't say this lightly. You are now an addict. You are an addict to the emotion of the thought of what happened to you. Okay. Because the brain literally sends a chemical to the body when you have that emotion. We know that. Okay. And just like somebody who's addicted to a chemical, a true chemical of cocaine or whatever it is, right? They now need to fulfill that addiction, right? They don't just make a decision. All of a sudden their body needs that cocaine. And all of a sudden, one line's not enough. Now they need 2 lines. And once a day is not enough. Now they need it twice a day. That's true addiction. Same thing with those emotions, right? I have the emotion of anger. Okay. I don't even remember what's caused the anger anymore. I just know that I feel it and now I need to satisfy it. And I'm going to find anything in my environment to satisfy that emotion. I'm going to walk out my door and I'm going to look down the street and that person rolled through the stop sign instead of coming to a full stop. You son of a bitch.
Yeah, it's them.
addiction satisfied, right? So anyway, I digress. I kind of got off on a tangent.
No, I'm fascinated by it. And it's interesting to see like how you said it, like we don't even know after a while why we're angry, but we look for those reasons. The brain needs to satisfy that. We need to get that fix.
Yep.
So what are some practical ways for people to start if they realize they have this chemical addiction to start rewiring? Like you said, the awareness, the metacognition is part of it.
That's right. The awareness is everything. You've got to start with the awareness. Okay. And that will be the hardest part. You have to start with the emotion. And look, there's 2 separate conversations. Why do I feel the way I feel? Okay. And there's something in your past, for our conversations, we're talking about perhaps combat and something like that. And something terrible happened that scarred you, right? There's something in the past. For a lot of people, it could be just a troubled relationship with a parent. Maybe they were, they were abused in some way, physically, emotionally, whatever it is, there's something back there that is the reason you feel this way. From a leadership perspective, I don't deal as much with why you feel that way. what happened in your life. I'm not saying it's not important. It's just not my specialty, right? I deal with, okay, you're feeling inadequate. You're feeling insecure. Maybe someday we'll get to why, and that probably will be an important conversation. But for our purposes right now, we have to recognize that for what it is. Okay, that's how you feel. Now, how are you acting on that? How have you been acting on that? So that's the hardest part. How do I feel? How am I acting? Okay, until you see that, you can't make a decision on how you want to act. Okay, so right, bite-sized stuff for anybody who's listening. Start there. The awareness in and of itself will guide you towards change automatically, because you're going to see some things that you don't necessarily like, and then you have to make a decision. How do I want to be? Okay. And you're going to have to battle that demon on your shoulder. Oh, you're lying to yourself. You're never going to be happy. All those things, right? You are garbage. You're not worthy. But now we're aware that's just an emotion. Oh, yeah. That's my little devil talking to me on the shoulder. I hear you, but I'm going to keep thinking differently, because I know now scientifically that's how the brain rewires itself. It is a process. That's why when somebody changes themselves, that's why when somebody comes out of a really traumatic event on the other side better than when they went into it, that's why it's such a success story, because it's that hard to do, right? If everybody could do it, we wouldn't even have this conversation.
Right, exactly. There wouldn't be this podcast. You wouldn't have this book. People would be just do it.
People would the world would be awesome. Oh boy, I realize how sucky I am. Let me just make that change. Look at how awesome I am.
Presto.
Presto changeo. I mean, I want, if I could share a story with you about.
Please do.
Kind of bring home this Wim Hof method. So I actually got my combat experience not in the SEAL teams, right? I got injured. I was in SEALs in the 90s. And I got injured. I was on deployment, and we actually got tasked with a ship takedown, right? The one operation we may have gotten on deployment. And I got injured during the rehearsal the day before. So I didn't go on the op, and that was the end of my career. Fast forward, I got myself medically cleared. There's a whole story in between there, but I'm with the FBI now. And me and some other folks like me got assigned to Special Operations Unit, the Rangers, Delta, SEALs, Green Berets, for a variety of reasons. Again, maybe another time we'll talk about what all that was about. But the bottom line is, I got attached to a Ranger regiment on deployment back in 2010. We saw a ton of combat, right? And, that was that. Fast forward 6 or 7 years, I've got my business. I'm going to an appointment. I duck into a coffee shop. I'm a little early. I open a book by Simon Sinek called Leaders Eat Last. And it's a good book. And if you've ever read the book, it starts with this story of this pilot named Johnny Bravo. And it starts going through Johnny Bravo's exploits. And it's clear, and he's a pilot, and it's clear that he's in Afghanistan. It's clear that he's supporting a special operations unit just by the terrain they're talking about, where they're going. Only a few groups would go there. He's talking about covering them now during a firefight that they've been ambushed. I'm enjoying the story because I'm relating to it, right? Everything to me is relatable. I've seen it. I've done it, until I realize I'm sweating all over the book and my hands are shaking, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the throes of a panic attack in the middle of, Philadelphia Coffee Company, whatever the heck it is, at morning rush hour. And once I realize, I'm like, oh man, I'm having a panic attack. And I kind of get the double dose, like, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. You kind of get a panic attack about the panic attack. So what did I do? Okay. Well, the first thing I did was I recognized the emotion, right? Whatever that was, panic, whatever was bringing that out, I recognized it, how I was feeling and what I was doing. And I said, okay, how do I want to behave? I want to behave calm. And I was like, I recognize this. How do I recognize this? Because this is what happens every time I step into an ice bath. You get an induced panic attack. So what do I do when I get into the cold? I take a long, slow, deep breath. I focus on one thing because I know the vagus nerve activates, serves to calm me down. And that's what I did. I took 2 deep breaths. Okay. Got control of myself, went on to have the meeting. When I went home, I told my wife about it. And she said, well, do you need to go see somebody? And Mike, I am good with going to talk to anybody about how I'm feeling, right? If I feel like I have no problem, right? I know a lot of people struggle with that. I don't. I'll go to anybody, be like, hey, look, this is what just happened to me. What do you think? Can you help me?
Yeah.
And so I said, look, I'll go see somebody, but what are they going to do? They're going to try to teach me how to get over that panic attack, right? They're going to try to teach me to understand it. And I think I already know how to do that.
Yeah. It's funny because like, that's essentially what I do professionally. And a lot of my work with people is teaching them how to breathe into those situations.
That's right. And so she never agrees with me for good reason, because I'm usually wrong. But even she was like, you might be right. And then what's worse was I said, they might want to give me some medication, a pill to help it. And I said, that's just not a road I want to go down. I've been down that road when I got injured, right? I got hooked on those pain medications. I don't want that anymore in my life, and I'm not saying that people who are on medication, it's wrong. It's just something that wasn't going to be good for me, and it wasn't going to solve the problem. So the point is, how do we tie Wim Hof method and all that stuff together? That's my kind of personal story when I realized there's something to just your breath, the experience of the cold, how it helps your physiology, the knowledge you have, and what you can do to eliminate and relieve that stress. I haven't had a panic attack since. Maybe I've had a ton of them. I'm breathing all the time. So, I don't recognize them,
Yeah, that's a powerful story. And I like the fact that you recognize, okay, the situational awareness, you took a view of it, what's going on, how would I like it to be, what can I do to get there?
Right. And it's a tool, right? The cold is a tool to help you go from the sympathetic fight or flight response to the parasympathetic rest and digest.
I'm down. So next question is, how can people find your book and find out what you're up to these days?
Yeah. So, everything Leader 193, my book is The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership, how leaders inspire confidence and clarity in combat, in the boardroom, and at the kitchen table. Because I do believe this leadership process is applicable in every aspect of our lives. So you go to my website, you can find the book, find more about Wim Hof, find more about my leadership practice. Leader 193 for Instagram and Facebook. Those are my two big social media giddy ups. And that's where you can find me.
And like everyone knows, we'll have all the links to that in the show notes. And this is a fun conversation. I really enjoyed this because I like to geek out in the science about how this all works and understand it. And it's a fun time. So thank you.
Well, and I appreciate, I think I took over your podcast, but I'm so appreciative of what you're doing and the message you're bringing to our vets coming back and who are struggling. And I appreciate your story and what you've done for yourself. So it is truly my honor to be here. And I hope I helped a little bit.
Yeah, you helped quite a bit. And I enjoy listening. I enjoy bringing out the stories and people and bringing out what they have to say. So this is how it works. And it's been a pleasure. So I'd really like to do this again sometime. So let's talk about that.
I hope so. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, that'll do it for this week of Transitions for More. Go ahead and subscribe to the show, follow it. Find us on Facebook, Instagram. You can email me, mike@transitionsformore.com with any questions or ideas for the show. And please send the show to people you know who might need to listen to it. Leave us a rating and review on iTunes if you get a chance. And just thanks for listening. All right, everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.